They're almost as bad as the Bears. Great. All right. All right. Good morning and welcome to our Bible class for today. We've been looking at 1st and 2nd Corinthians, or it's 1st and 2nd Thessalonians rather. One of those places Paul wrote a couple letters to that we have. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. But we got through 2nd Thessalonians really quickly, but kind of in light of some questions we had both in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, in light of some of the world events, I figured we'd kind of take a deeper dive and look a little more closely into especially what Paul's saying in both these letters about Christ's return, because there were some questions there. All right, and so when you think of Christ's second coming, what's the most puzzling part for you? How and when? Yes, okay, good. And of course, the challenge with when is we don't get to know until he comes. Jesus said, and I don't have, where is that? Okay, that's, I've got it towards the end in chapter 5, and elsewhere he talks about coming like a thief in the night. Jesus said, no one knows the day or the hour, not even him, at least at that point. But only the Father. So how and when were good questions. Yeah, Jeanette.
Well, and it seems like they've been looking for it almost since the beginning.
Right. I mean, so Jesus ascends, and then the angels say, "You've seen him ascend. You're going to see him return the same way he left." And that's all they get. Again, they don't get when. I mean, so you kind of get a how. He's going to. Lo, he comes in cloud descending, as the hymn goes. But yeah, we've been waiting for Christ's return now for 2,000 years, and that seems to be, again, this is the Thessalonian letters were among Paul's earliest. Galatians is the one that might be earlier, and so again, Paul was there for 3 weeks and then leaves and then writes back these letters, and there's one of the things they seem to be stuck on. Even that early is what happens, when is Jesus going to return? When's that going to happen? What's that going to look like? What happens to us? What happens to those who've died between now and then? Although that seems to be one of the things that the Thessalonians are struggling with. So, all right. Well, good. All right, so again, we'll see how this goes, and we'll first look, though, at 1 Thessalonians 4, which is where Paul gets into this. And so Paul wrote, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep," so those who've died, "that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep." So Paul's even saying here earlier on that when Jesus died and rose again, so God will bring to him all those who've died. Paul expands on this in a bigger way in 1 Corinthians 15, where he talks about what Jesus' death and resurrection means for our own death and resurrection, but he at least touches on it here. And then, "For this we declare to you by a word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God." So we've at least sort of got the how. Again, he's going to descend, and it's going to be obvious. "And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." All right, and so we get Jesus is just coming in clouds, descending, and the dead in Christ, and all of us who are alive when he comes get up in the clouds with him. So, and therefore encourage one another with these words. So again, a lot of times when we talk about Christ's return or talk about the end of the world or things, it's easy to get into things that should make us afraid. But here Paul's saying, and all the Revelation, same way. They're written to be encouraging, not to scare people. And so maybe just kind of recognizing that as we read and look at this stuff is kind of helpful, if that makes sense, right?
Yes, I think where it says, we will always be with the Lord.
Yeah.
To me, that is most comforting.
Right. Yeah, we will always be with the Lord. Yes, definitely. Good. Yeah, Al.
So those that have died, it seems to be in a holding pattern? Is that where the...
That's a good question. Yes, kind of. And there's still sort of some debate over what exactly that looks like, how exactly that happens. But yeah, kind of in a holding pattern. Whether it's because they're in this thing sometimes called soul sleep, where if you're dead, throughout the New Testament, they use that metaphor of sleep as to refer to death. So it is like, maybe it's like they're sleeping, so you die, and then you're awake and you're with God, and how much time has passed, who knows? Or whether it's God, because again, God's outside of time, so things work that way. But yeah, we're with the Lord, and that's the comforting thing. And some of these details we won't necessarily know this side of heaven, but that's okay. We'll know with the Lord, we're with the Lord, and that's the encouragement we need. Yeah, Don.
So we're going to be with the Lord. In what form?
Well, in what form? That's another good question and thought. Yeah. Well, because we have to be solid at the end. That we get. So one of the ways we think of death is that it's we have a body and soul, and the death separates those two things. And so when in the resurrection, that separation's fixed, and we're given the new bodies. Again, Paul gets into some of that in 1 Corinthians 15. But yeah, so and if there's a new heaven and a new earth, then we have new bodies, and they'll be like just like Jesus' new body after he's resurrected. Because some of that, the idea we're just kind of disembodied spirits floating on clouds, thing that kind of comes in from some of the Greek philosophy stuff that's around in the New Testament and still is today. We talk about Gnosticism, kind of separating that mind and spirit away from the body. But yeah, because there's that physical creation stuff that gets restored is always present there. So, good question. All right, and so again, the challenge we get with this, especially this idea of meeting the Lord in the air, the challenge in our culture comes not only from this being kind of confusing in general, but because a false or flawed interpretations kind of been in vogue for the last 100+ years, and so makes that harder for us to kind of separate some of this stuff out from one another. So here's a chart kind of one way that this, and we'll get into more of the details as we go through, but here's a table of what some of this looks like as we're looking at Thessalonians and how how people interpret it and how there's some challenges and misinterpretations there. So this is kind of the end part of what we'll talk, and we'll go through some of these, defining some of these terms too. This idea of premillennial dispensationalism, which there'll be a quiz on how to spell and say that at the end. This is towards the end. So this idea so after Jesus dies, then there's different ages of the world going back from creation to the present, and from the time Jesus dies until now, we're in the church age. And then here we get the funny stuff that we get from what we were just looking at in Thessalonians about meeting Jesus in the clouds. They see this idea that Christ comes back, but there's a rapture, and the righteous dead are all raised, and we go up there with Jesus first, and then Jesus comes back with everyone else here at the end. And in the middle there is this idea of a 7-year tribulation and the reign of the Antichrist, and some of the things that go along with that, that people put into that are the restoration of the Jews to Palestine, which has been in the news a little bit the last couple weeks, the conversion of the remnant of Israel, the temple rebuilt, the priesthood sacrifices, cult ritual restored, all that stuff. And then after Jesus really returns and the Antichrist is really destroyed, then we get a millennium, 1,000 years of peace, where Satan's bound. But then Satan gets out at the end, somehow breaks out of jail. And then at the end there's judgment of the wicked, and then there's this eternal state. And so again, this is this idea of premillennial dispensationalism and how that works, how they think things work at the end. The people who follow that, and we'll touch on that, but it's kind of entered the popular culture of American evangelicalism. The Left Behind books and a lot of those kind of things teach that kind of thing. So, because again, it makes good stories, lots of things exploding, and a small band of good guys fighting against some evil empire kind of thing. So makes good stories, but doesn't necessarily fit with.
There's a lot of it out there, big church bodies.
Yep.
Taking this part or that part.
Yep.
Oh yeah, they make a good case. I listen to a lot of it. They do.
Mm-hmm.
What bothers me about all that is we're not. If the one verse is true, we will never know the time or day. We're not
Yep.
going to know when the last day comes.
Right.
But if that happens into that first box,
Yeah.
the arrows start happening. From that point, you can put it on a calendar.
Right, or at least they think so. Yeah, that you
Then
can.
you could.
Yeah.
Then you would know. When
Yeah. Well, okay. So, day or the hour. Right. Yeah. But sure. That just refers to the rapture. But then after that, then you've got these. Okay. 3.5 years later, this happens. 7 years, this happens, and we're going to hit on all these. Jewish holy days where these things are going to happen, and all that stuff. Although no one will know, because all the good Christians who would know these things were raptured and aren't around to figure things out. So, but,
Pastor,
yeah.
is that belief based on what Revelation has to say, or what are they?
Yeah, I mean, so and we'll get into that, but yeah, it's a interpretation of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, especially, along with this bit from the passage from First Thessalonians, all kind of jumbled together, because
and Matthew, when we talked last.
and yeah, I mean, that we get and some of Jesus, predictions of what'll happen later too. So yeah, so I mean, all those things mixed together, and we'll touch a bit on how that is and why that is. So then the other version that we generally follow. So we're in the present age after Jesus. We're in the millennium now. And the millennium again comes from Revelation, where there's a couple passages about 1,000 years of peace. But we're in this time of now and not yet. That Jesus has defeated everything, defeated the devil, defeated sin and death, but they're still fighting, even though they either don't realize or they realize they're defeated and just want to mess things up for a while. But then Christ will return, and the judgments then, and then then after that we get into the eternal state. So, all right. All right, so this first batch of what we call premillennial dispensationalism, it can generally just be traced back to this guy, John Nelson Darby, who's an Anglican priest turned traveling evangelical preacher, and one of his big things to draw crowds in is this new understanding of Christ's second coming and how that works. And so he's active. He lives from 1800 to 1882. And again, Anglican, so he's from Church of England, but he makes 7 trips to the United States over the course of his lifetime. All right, and then following him, I'm not sure they ever actually meet, but Darby's theology then influences this guy named Cyrus Scofield, who expands on those ideas and publishes a reference Bible, the Scofield Reference Bible, which is a widely circulated study Bible, which popularized this idea. Because again, if people get a Bible and they look at those study notes that they've got, and this all says, hey, this is what this means, this is all that's going to happen, then people jump on it. And that's, there were 2 editions, I think, 1907 and 1917, when that comes out. So about 100 years ago, but that's as this idea is coming. And you've got some more apocalyptic worries about end of the world stuff happening around that point. Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones who thought Jesus would return in 1914 and there'd be big stuff. They're the ones that got closest to something actually happening because they at least guessed the beginning of World War I. But all right, and so these 2 guys, and I guess I forgot to divide this, make this a little bigger print for you, so sorry. But so Darby and Cyrus Scofield divide God's relationship with people into 7 ages or dispensations, and we're currently in the 6th dispensation then from, which began with Jesus' death on the cross. I have the notes of how those different dispensations were. But you had things like, creation to Abraham, Abraham to Moses, Moses to David. Those were kind of their dispensation ages sort of thing. All right. Again, their vision includes a rapture in which Christians are snatched up into heaven before the beginning of an increasingly hell-like 7-year tribulation for those remaining on earth. Prior to Darby's influence, Christians understood the rapture as an event that would happen simultaneously with the final resurrection and the end of the age. So that passage we see with 1 Thessalonians, when Christ returns and we meet up in the air, that all happens at once. That isn't just, we get caught up in the air and then more bad stuff happens and then Christ returns. They kind of separate out these things that had been understood as all happening at once. All right. Oh, I did. Yeah. And so, again, the rapture as an event that the understanding had been that the rapture was an event that would happen simultaneously with the final resurrection and the end of the age. But Darby uniquely repositioned it to take place at the end of the era of the church just before the tribulation. Then taught end of the 7 years of tribulation, Christ returns, defeats the Antichrist, and commences the 7th dispensation, the millennium, the 1,000-year glorious reign of Christ on earth. All right, and so then the catch is one of these things. Then again, it separates things that had been understood as being together. The premillennial dispensational literature distinguishes the rapture and the inauguration of the millennial reign by referring to the former. So the rapture is the blessed hope of Titus 2:13a, and the glorious appearing is 2:13b. If you're separating out of a verse into 2 different things, that probably means you're getting into trouble. But it's referring to 2 different things. But that's part of what they do. All right. But according to the historic creeds, this is all just that there's one time this all this happens at once, and it's not separated out. There's no biblical. As we looked at 4:16, that we're caught up in the clouds. Well, there's no biblical evidence that there's some sort of secret rapture thing that happens first. And the book of Revelation doesn't teach a pre-tribulation rapture of Christians either. Again, as people look at Revelation, and it's all that fantastic imagery about what's going on. Then people try and make it fit world events or try and make it fit some of these other things. But recognizing, A, that it's a special type of literature where it's using symbolism and imagery to communicate things, that it's not necessarily literal, is helpful. And also, again, remembering that it was written to encourage, not to make people afraid. All right. And so here's a fancy chart on Revelation, and you kind of see that one of the other issues is we're too Western sometimes in how we interpret things, and forget that the Bible was written by people with more of an Eastern mindset. In that, so in the West we like straight lines. We like things happen A, B, C, D, E, F, G, just kind of bam, bam, bam. In Eastern thought, the way they tend to think is more circly or spirally. And so it just happens, means it happens a few different times. I remember my Hebrew, my Old Testament professor, one of them was from India, and he'd always complain about us thinking too Westernly about things. And so especially like looking at the Psalms, that we're used to arguments. You start with an intro, you have your 3 argumentative points, and you start with the state of it, and then you kind of explain it, and then you kind of build your argument until the conclusion, and the conclusion's the important part. In Eastern thought and Hebrew thought, like especially in the Psalms, we get it in some other places too, it tends to be kind of that the meat's in the middle. It's like a sandwich, that it builds to a point in the middle and then kind of shrinks back to the conclusion. And so, just slightly different things set up. And so another way that happens is that sometimes how Revelation gets misinterpreted is that there's all these 7 event things that happen. And us Westerners read it and go, oh, this has to be linear. So first the 7 letters happen, then the 7 seals happen, then the 7 trumpets happen, then so on and so on. Instead of recognizing that sometimes it's a spiral, and so some of these 7s are more repeating the same thing or talking about the same thing from a slightly different point of view. And then that helps understand things too. All right, so again, when discussing the rapture, Christ's coming, final judgment, and the like, the Bible uniformly uses singular nouns. So, one-time things. So if we looked at some of the predictions that we get. So Daniel 12, 1-2, which is the Son of Man coming in clouds of great glory. That's that happens one time. It's not times. The hour has come for me to, that Jesus talking in John 5. It's the hour. It's not the hours are coming. That the day, as Paul's talking to the people in Athens about when, that Jesus died and rose again and will come back. The day, not days. And then a resurrection, not resurrections. When they're talking about what happens towards the end too. Again, the rapture, the blessed hope, glorious appearing, and the final judgment are terms that are synonymous with one event, Christ's second coming. All right, and so there's one future hope for the church, the bodily return of Jesus Christ, which ushers in the New Jerusalem, new heaven, new earth, not the beginning of some 1,000-year earthly kingdom for Jesus. All right, because Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. All right. Any questions, thoughts, comments more as we go through?
What did Luther think about which way it was going to move?
Well, again, some of the stuff, Luther wasn't thinking about because no one was thinking that way before. Luther tends to be, as he thinks about it, yes, because they worry about some of this stuff as you go, oh, well, oh, there's another plague coming through, or another revolt coming through. Is this a sign that Jesus is coming back? Well, maybe, but again, Luther tend to think that it's just a one-time thing and not any of this dispensational stuff. And as we go through too, some of this premillennial dispensational stuff talks about, the Antichrist is some, political figure, tends to maybe be someone in charge of the EU or the UN or something who can send black helicopters to go after everyone. For Luther, the Antichrist is the Pope, or the office of the papacy. So it's sort of a political thing, but it's primarily a religious thing. Someone who's against Christ, who's leading people away from Christ from within the church. All right. Yep. So again, they're synonymous with one event. God's always had one plan of salvation, never two. And one of the other challenges that comes up with premillennial dispensationalism is you've got kind of this. Well, there's a separate special plan for the Jews, but no. Salvation is always by grace, never by race. And that's a good, helpful reminder for a lot of reasons, not just. But all right. All right, and then we'll define some terms as we go through that I've been talking about, and we'll see and take some time to think about them as we go through them. So again, we're talking about millennialism. Is the idea that there's going to be this millennium of peace comes from Revelation, that this idea that there's talk about 1,000 years of peace. But again, numbers are symbolic in Revelation. So it's not a literal 1,000 years. And the three main ways of understanding that then are premillennial, which is what we've been talking about with the tribulation and stuff. Postmillennial, which we'll get to. The definitions are in alphabetical order, so we'll go there. And then this one, amillennialism, which is the prefix that means without. So the teaching embraced by Lutherans that there will not be a literal 1,000-year visible earthly kingdom, earthly reign of God, of Jesus. Perhaps maybe we could better understand that we should talk about it as a realized or inaugurated millennialism, because it embraces the idea that Christ has a kingdom, but he's reigning now. That, like he says in the Great Commission, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples. We pray for God's kingdom to come. His kingdom comes without our prayer, but we pray that it may come among us. Also, that's not praying for some millennium sometime in the future. It's praying that God's rule will be present and active with us now. So, yeah, Lois.
Well, it's kind of messy to have this idea with the world, the mess that it is. I mean, his kingdom is reigning now.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the challenge that if we're in God's kingdom now, then why is the world so messed up? And that is certainly a struggle, and kind of the answer is that God's ruling, God's reigning, but our sin keeps getting in the way, but we're not to the point where God's fully gotten rid of sin, fully gotten rid of the devil, fully gotten rid of death yet. And so, it's also part of why Luther will talk about two kingdoms. That there's the kingdom of the church that God rules directly, and the kingdom of the world that God rules through other authorities, but that God's rule is imperfect because he's working through these intermediaries that are all imperfect. And so we're waiting for the point when that God will really be in control. Or will fully be in control, I suppose. Maybe not really. But no, good thought, good question. All right. Any other thoughts on amillennialism? Yeah, Jeanette.
I like to look at the top of
Right.
the window.
Yep. Yeah.
He's holding the world, and, he is ruling.
Yep.
We're gonna go through a lot of tribulations, which is
Yeah.
happening right now.
Mhm.
And, but we're held secure.
Yeah.
And that's-
Yep. Yeah, Jesus is ruling. He's always with us, no matter how messy the rest of the world looks. But those things are true. Good. All right.
So what do Christians in those other parts of the world think?
Depends on what part of the world
Like Ukraine?
you're thinking. Well, again,
Unless
I think that those are the challenging times of how is God in control? How is God ruling? How is God's kingdom here? It's easy for us. I mean, if you were here at early service, easy for those of us with working indoor plumbing to trust God. We're pretty comfortable, but those who don't have it for a variety of reasons, especially including war and strife like that it's a lot harder for them to understand. But at the same time, of course, that's how the world has been for a while. And so just praying, recognizing that God's in control, even if it doesn't always look like it, that it's the result of sin and pride of these earthly leaders who don't want to put their people first, or their instead want to grab power and resources and things.
We
Yeah.
just can't escape tribulation.
No, we can't escape tribulation at all.
You look at the apostles and,
Yep.
and look at Paul and
Right.
all that he went through. I mean, you're,
Yeah, I mean, we're also,
Jesus
we're pretty
said
blessed that,
he's- But he said he'll be with you.
Yeah.
All the while.
yeah. I mean, we don't have the kind of, military or civil unrest that there is present in other places of the world. And we don't have the kind of religious persecution that's present in other places of the world.
We may though.
We may, right?
We don't.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we don't is kind of strange in the history of the world, but I'm reminded that God's with us anyway. Then we have different things that try and draw us away from God than some of those things. Yeah, Mark.
I'm just wondering how many people here have actually seen the movie Left Behind? That's a good homework project. Go watch the movie.
Go watch the movie. Yeah, that's easier than trying to read the
It's
whole book stuff, right? Yeah.
it's very instructive because,
8 or 9.
if you go with the idea that all of a sudden there's a point where God's going to take all the believers off the earth, then what you got left is all the unbelievers.
Right.
And then it kind of paints this picture of, Satan reigning and how bad it's going to be. But the idea is that somehow God is going to feel bad about that.
Right.
He's going to want to give them a second chance. And that does harm to the gospel because then he teaches salvation by motivation of the law.
Right.
Because if things are really bad enough,
Yeah.
then people are going to believe in Jesus. And that's just so contrary to what we believe in the power of the gospel. And I think that's our big concern as Lutherans when we look at this whole millennial thing is that it really does harm to the gospel because it teaches a different way of salvation than by grace through faith in Jesus alone. It's a really fun thing to watch. There's some other ones out there I would not recommend. that really go deep into the whole evil reign of Satan and all that stuff. But that first Left Behind movie is pretty informative.
Yep. Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, and so this gracious rule spans the time between our Savior's first and second coming, so what we're in now, and that the 1,000 years we find in Revelation 20 refers to the time of Christ's reign from the day of his ascension until the last day. The millennium is a present reality of Christ's heavenly reign and not a future hope that Christ will rule on earth after his return. All right. And again, we get to the Antichrist, the evil villain of this thing. So some Christians believe this person is primarily a political ruler. However, the Bible teaches that the Antichrist sets himself up in the church and promotes doctrines that diminish the completed work of Christ. So again, it's not a political thing, it's a religious thing. It's against Christ. It's trying to lead people astray within the church. The Antichrist does not necessarily refer to a single individual, but that there have been and will be many Antichrists throughout time. And that's how John uses that in his letters. So, one example I use when I do this, one of the two or three times I've been quoted in the Iowa State Daily was around when Obama was elected president, and there was some of that evangelical idea of people calling him an Antichrist. You know, some liberal college student over there has decided, hey, well, let's run with this and look at how ridiculous Christians are. But the editor was attending our church at the time and said, you know, why don't you actually talk to a pastor and not just make up your article? So he came talk to me, and I didn't quite flippantly say Obama's not the Antichrist because he's not wearing a funny hat, but close. But I talked about how the Lutheran understanding of Antichrist is that it's a religious thing, not a political thing, especially for Lutherans. If you remember, we went through the Book of Concord. It talks about the office of the papacy as the Antichrist. That Luther was that concerned about how they were leading people away from Christ, away from teaching people things that diminish the work of Christ. Well, sure, Christ died for you, but you have to buy this indulgence. But you have to do these acts of penance in order to make sure you're really, really saved. And you have to, Christ died, but you don't have enough merits. Fortunately, the saints have some extra merits they can give you for the right price. All those sorts of things were how Luther saw the Antichrist. Again, not a political thing, but a religious thing. So, all right. All right, then we also, when we talk about the end of the world, we'll hear this word Armageddon. It's derived from two Hebrew words, Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo in Palestine. Refers especially to, there's a battle mentioned in Revelation 16:16 that occurs there. And again, some Christians take this to be the final battle of the 7-year tribulation that ushers in the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. However, it's more consistent with the Bible to interpret Armageddon as the last major onslaught of Satan before the second and final coming of Christ. All right. So why would John pick this? Well, why is this? Well, it gets mentioned a lot in the Bible because it's the plains of Megiddo are a fairly important strategic spot. They're up here. This is a modern map of Israel-Palestine, so you kind of have an idea. So again, the Gaza Strip that's been in the news a little bit is right here, right by Egypt. And it's actually kind of interesting if you listen to the names of some of the villages and places that are there. This is kind of that area where the Philistines were throughout when time of David and Solomon and some of those others. And then the West Bank is the bigger area here. Again, it refers to the West Bank of the Jordan River. But then Megiddo's kind of just north of what's now in the West Bank, so it overlooks the Jezreel Valley, which is a very fertile, important farming area. And there's been several important battles that have happened there. In the 15th century BC, so this is probably before the Israelites are back in the Promised Land. This is probably when they're still in Egypt, but might be early on. There was a battle at Megiddo fought between the armies of the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose III and a large Canaanite coalition led by the rulers of Megiddo and Kadesh and some other groups. That's one of the big battles of Megiddo. Then probably the most important biblical one in 609 BC is between Egyptian Pharaoh Necho II and the kingdom of Judah, and that's when King Josiah dies in 609 BC. And if you remember, as we went through through the minor prophets, that's kind of the beginning of the end before the southern kingdom then gets conquered by the Assyrians. And then for you World War I buffs, there's a battle of Megiddo fought in 1918 during World War I between Allied troops led by General Edmund Allenby and the defending Ottoman army. You know, remember, Ottoman Empire in control of modern-day Turkey was kind of on the Axis side in World War I. And so there was a battle there. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on there? All right. All right, and so then when we talk about apocalyptic literature, it comes from the Greek word apocalyptics, which is we find in Revelation 1:1. It means uncovering a revelation. And so that genre of literature, especially Daniel, Revelation, but we get some in some other spots through in the Bible, frequently uses colors, numbers, beasts, demons, devils, and angels to make a theological point. And these visions are not to be interpreted literally, but symbolically. And so again, that's part of, you get into problems when you're taking something that's supposed to be symbolic and start interpreting it literally. The reverse can happen too. When you try and, but even when you try interpreting something that's supposed to be symbolic, take it literally. Well, for example, here, if you look over here, here's the parable window. Over here, the parable window of the Good Samaritan, which always took me a bit to remember for sure, but because it's the hands of the Samaritan holding some oil, got some bandages and some money to pay for and take care of the guy who was beaten on the side of the road. There's some really wild interpretations over the years, over the centuries by theologians over what each of those things represents. That what the oil represents, what the bandage represents, what the coins represented are. On the other hand, also, if you go to Israel today, you can find people that will point out the exact spot on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem where this parable happened. But of course, remember, it's a parable. It didn't necessarily literally happen. I mean, Jesus could have taken it, but we don't know for sure. But it's a story, and so it didn't necessarily actually happen. So you can't actually find that there. And then again, well, of course, you bind up the wounds, and yeah, you can make some stretches in terms of trying to figure out what each of those things represent, but. That's not necessarily the point, and you're going to get lost in the trees or the leaves instead of seeing the whole forest. All right, we talk about Christological. Reminder that as we read Scripture, the idea is that all Scripture has Jesus written on every page, as Luther said, and that it focuses on the person and work of Jesus, especially his death on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. So as you're reading something in the Bible and it's not pointing you towards that, and maybe even pointing you away from that, maybe kind of recalibrate your interpretation and see how that's supposed to be working for you. Again, a Christological reading of the Bible embraces the belief that God's activity is known only through Christ and not as some maintained through current events in the Middle East. All right, so again, we talk premillennial dispensationalism was that first chart, what's going on wrong. So dispensationalism, you were asking what groups deal with that, embraced by non-creedal movements, especially Assemblies of God, Pentecostal, and non-denominational churches. It's the system of biblical interpretation distinguishes between 7 periods or dispensations in biblical history. Here's their listed all out if you want to know what they think these dispensations are. So first dispensation is before the fall. Second dispensation is from the fall to Noah. Third one is from Noah to Abraham. Fourth one's from Abraham to Moses. Fifth one's from Moses to Christ. Sixth one's grace, the church age, that's where we currently are. And then seventh is the kingdom, when Christ is literally, physically reigning here on earth. And so a dispensation is a period of time when God tests people to see how obedient they are to his will. But again, what's the problem with this? It elevates human obedience over God's gracious work of salvation. So it's all about what you do and not about what Christ has done for you. And so that's the problem. All right. We'll probably do one or two more, and then we'll wrap up because we're getting close to time. So the fancy church word for stuff that happens at the end is eschatology. I got to say these big words every now and then, so you remember I went to seminary. Derived from the Greek word eschaton, which means the end. So eschatology is study of the end times of the world. All right, and I think, why don't we stop there, just because this will be a big section. We'll continue this next week. Next week I'll try and actually have this on handouts for you, because next week actually we'll be in the student center. The sanctuary is getting used by the youth to record some stuff for Bible for the Sunday school Christmas service. So that seemed to be when that works. So we'll be in the student center next week. But all right. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next week.